Greetings, YouTube. Today I thought I'd take a moment and speak about NPCs, non-player characters. In particular, the NPC classes as presented in the OGL. The Adept, the Noble, Expert, Warrior, what am I missing? I'm missing one of them. I'm sure I am. I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head. And the Mage Right from the Eberron setting. Now, of the Commoner, that's what I'm missing. Now, of the NPC classes that I'm talking about here, I kind of wish the Mage Right was part of the core OGL. It makes perfect sense. It's an arcane version of the Adept, and I think with either of those classes, you can do a great job of emulating like hedge witches and shamans and witch doctors. You mix them up, and a couple of levels of each, and you can do a really good job at a primitive shaman. Or someone, out in the middle of nowhere that takes care of the village, some isolated village's basic magical needs. But the one thing I always do is I have a hard cap of level 5 for NPC classes, with the exception of the Expert. Now there's a reason for this. If you've invested enough of your time and energy into training to have more than 5 levels in something in NPCs, then you're a player character. And you've now entered the realm of the warrior or the wizard or the sorcerer or something. You are no longer just some simple low-level character. You're now a player character, even if you're not one being played by the players. Even if you are a non-player character in the context of the world, you are no longer just a non-player character class. And that holds true even for the powerful, such as nobles. Because I think one of the problems is that people confuse personal power with political power. Now, like a warlord, it's got a lot of personal power, but probably has very little political power. He can only control, or she can only control, what they can see and what they can impress upon the world through their own charisma and their leadership and their intimidation and their diplomacy. They don't have a lot of political clout. They just have personality and the ability to influence a small group, even if it's a decent sized group. But they're not controlling cities, and they're not controlling states. Whereas a king can be born into the role, can have very few class levels, but they have a lot of political power because they were born into that position. That's the stature which they were given by the gods, or whatever the reason you have in your campaign for kings or leaders like that of having them. So you could quite easily have a king that's only a 3rd level noble, and yet takes care of armies and orders around, entire legions of sorcerers or wizards or something. He says you don't need a lot of character classes if you have 100 wizards at your command, or 1,000 marksmen of some variety or other. You just don't need the class levels to have all kinds of political power. And of course, they can mix match, and you could have different NPC classes as long as they don't go higher than 5. I don't care. And again, the exception being Expert, because I think the Expert is a wonderful generic class that really has a lot of possibilities and lets you do things like come up with great craftsmen, decent musicians that you don't want to be bards or actors or dancers. Sages, of course. I love the Expert class for making sages. Experts that you need to contact for some esoteric piece of information or research. They're a great way to emulate an alchemist that just does alchemical substances, not the player character class from the Pathfinder setting, which is an awesome class, don't get me wrong, but it's not really required for your average everyday town that needs somebody that mixes up tinderwigs and the birth control, or something that makes you look good for the next hour. Something simple, alchemical substances, just barely in the semi-magical range, that kind of thing. Maybe the guy that makes the smoke powder for the firearms of the world you have. You don't need an alchemist for that. All you need is somebody who has a lot of ranks in alchemy and some other related skills. And I think you could use nobles mixed with expert to make a really good leader. If you so chose, if they haven't branched out into having, some player character classes. For example, I could see a prince having been trained by some great swordsman, so he's actually a 1st level fighter. he's got 2 or 3 ranks of noble, then he's got a bunch of expert ranks on top of that, which gives him the diplomacy or the intimidation that he needs to do his job. So I really like the way the NPCs are presented in the game. I think they're flexible. I think they're useful. I think the Mage Right is a perfect thing that should be in core, but it can't be because it's from Eberron. But we can use it as core in our games, of course. We have that power. So I'd like to hear, do you have any hard caps on non-player characters? Do you think that it makes sense for a 20th level commoner? Because I certainly don't think it makes sense for a 20th level commoner. In my version of commoner ranks, you get 1 rank for every 10 years you've been alive. You don't have any training, folks. You're just a farmer or a fisherman or something. All right? You just don't have a lot of ranks in things because your life is a very even keel. There's not a lot of learning curve in being a commoner. So by the time you're 50, yay, you're a 5th level commoner. Yep. Okay, great. Now you get to retire. So how do you handle non-player characters? And do you use non-player character classes that aren't in the core? Have you come up with your own, or have you borrowed it from other settings or other third-party group books, things like that? I'd like to hear what you have to say.